If you look at the first page, or indeed the last page of a book, you will see that the front and the back pages are usually thicker, and they are often decorative, or at least in colored paper or something. And these are what is known as end pages, or technically the loose page is the end page, and the page that is glued to the cover is the paste down. Most end pages in commercially produced case-bound books are simply glued to the signature, which we call tipping in. However, if you look at the page behind the end page in this book, you will see stitches, which indicate that the end pages are actually a signature or section that has been stitched into the book. Now, made end pages are certainly more work, but they do provide a more substantial and secure end page, and can also help to eliminate any marks that one may have on the back of hand-colored papers. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is how I do a very simple made end page. These end pages consist of 3 elements: the colored paper, the decorative paper that I use, then a blank page that is the same size and that's folded in half, that goes behind, or in the case of the back one, in front of the colored paper. And then thirdly, a single sheet that will come on the outside. I usually do these in a batch and mark them accordingly, but you can work out your own system, of course. I'm still going to trim these afterwards, so I don't have to be totally precise, but I usually mark them so that I know what's going on. My reason for backing the paste down is that a thicker paste down helps to avoid it expanding or wrinkling when it's glued. I'm using PVA here, although I do sometimes use a mix of PVA and paste, but it does need to be somewhat watered down. So I basically take my set, I put the single sheet aside, and I start with the blank sheet, which I go over evenly with the roller. And once I've done that, I'll set it aside. I find it best to glue both sheets that I'm gluing together in order to avoid any pull, although there are people who I've seen doing this differently. So next I'll take my colored sheet. I need to make sure that I have, particularly if it has a pattern, that it has the right side facing the blank sheet. And I'll do the same thing to it and go over it evenly with the roller. I then place the 2 glued sheets on top of each other very carefully, making sure that they're exactly aligned at the edge. And I'll then rub them well with a dry cloth. I then turn my end sheet over and apply glue to the other side of the printed page, which will be the paste down. And I do the same thing with the single sheet that will be glued to the outside. I glue them together carefully again, although in this case I place the single sheet slightly in from the edge and then rub it down well. I then turn it over and go over the printed side with a clean dry cloth. In this case I'm using printed marbled paper that I've waxed. So you just need to be careful that you don't damage the paper by rubbing too harshly. I then normally put it aside for a few minutes while I do the next one before pressing it. What I find works well for me is to let my one end page sit while I do the next one, just for a few minutes. And then I press it briefly and then hang it up to dry. So before I put it in the press, I normally, to be safe, I put a sheet of wax paper folded with the wax on the outside, and then I'll put it between some waste paper just to absorb any excess moisture, and then I press it briefly and then hang it up to dry. However, you could do this differently. You could also leave it for longer in the press or let it dry in the press. And once my end pages are dry, they won't be entirely flat. So what I normally do is then put them in the press overnight. So I'll normally put sheets of wax paper between them just to be safe, and then carefully put them on top of each other and between boards and press them overnight. Okay, my end pages have now been pressed overnight and they're flat. So my end page now consists of the paste down sheet, the actual end page, and a sheet behind it. And when I stitch the book, I'm going to stitch through the sheet behind it so that the end page functions as another signature in the book. So basically the front and the back end pages become signatures or sections that are stitched into the book. So when I punch the holes of my signatures, I basically punch through that sheet, being careful not to go through the decorative sheet. And I then continue to punch my signatures as I usually do. If you have other ways of doing it, that's fine. And when I come to the last end page, I then just repeat what I did for the first one. When it comes to stitching the book block, I basically treat the end pages as any other signature, and I stitch them on just as I would another signature. One just has to be careful that to not tear the single sheet of paper, which is obviously more fragile. And when one comes to the last signature or the last end page, one just treats it as one would the last signature that one is stitching into a book. When it comes to gluing the book block, I find it best to apply a thin strip of glue along the first signature, or between the first signature and the made end page. This helps to make it more secure, but it also enables you to make sure that the end page is exactly aligned, especially if it's a book that I'm not going to be trimming. And then I basically finish off gluing the book block as I would for any other book. As I said, there are other ways, far more complex ways of doing made end pages, but I find that this simple method does provide a more secure way of doing end pages for case binding at least. So I hope you found this helpful, and if so, please like and subscribe, etc., to stay in touch.